I'm totally convinced that the fact of having been uprooted and has left a lasting impact, and it creates a certain degree of insecurity, which I think never ever leaves you. I can still see myself arriving at Liverpool Street Station and being picked up. That I can remember. But everything I can't even remember much about the journey. It's just a blank. It's shocking. It shocks me. I expect that they've got some information on what happened when I arrived in England. I don't expect to find anything about my pre-existence in Austria, but I assume that they have some records of particularly the efforts that my mother made to try and get my father, who was in America, and of course she was divorced from him, to try and contribute something to my upkeep. And I suspect that I will find something on that in these files. But anyway, I'm going with an open mind to see what I do find.
You said you haven't been associated with the Kindertransport, so it is actually, that's why you probably haven't looked for any documents as such, or you didn't need to.
No, I just, I have spent all my life looking into the current world and the future world,
yes.
And much less looking back. I don't spend my time bemoaning what might have been or what I might have done, and it's my fault, and it's only recently that I've been sort of dragooned into confronting all these issues. So it's all your fault.
It's my fault. Okay, so whatever happens today is my fault.
Absolutely.
Whatever you're going to find. Okay, so let's park the car and let's go in.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Sorry. Hello.
Welcome to World Jewish Relief. I know that you've heard a little bit about that we have some records here. The reason that we have records is that we were formerly known as the Central British Fund for German Jewry, and the organisation was started in 1933 in order to help rescue Jews mainly from Germany and Austria to flee the Nazis, and after Kristallnacht it became evident that we had to help bring them here. So we were the organisation that helped bring numbers about 65,000 refugees, including the 10,000 children on the Kindertransport. So I know that you were one of those 10,000. So I looked and I have a registration card for you. Your name, Hella Henrietta, that pig. Your date of birth. And then, quite importantly, the date that you arrived in the United Kingdom, 15th of March 1939.
So what is on is here?
So here you can see some further information, your name, your parents' name, Ernest and is it Johanna?
Johanna, yes.
And their address
in Vienna.
In Vienna. So that's presumably the address that you grew up in until...
Not really.
No?
Well, I mean, obviously for the first few years of my life, but when they divorced, my mother obviously lived at a different address then. And I spent a lot of time living with my grandparents, who were also in the same, I mean, they lived in Döbling as this thing. This is central, Vienna 1 is central Vienna. And they were living on, well, not the outskirts, but one of the sort of, in the sort of, no longer the inner ring of Vienna. But, and then I see all these addresses here.
Yes, so these...
Well, that's the family that took me in when I arrived in Fields.
And that's where you went straight from?
That's from Liverpool Street, yes.
On a train was that you went?
Yes.
Wow. And what were they like?
Well, they were, one of the families who would agree to take the Kindertransport children. And, I obviously went, at that point, nobody knew that my mother would still be able to come to Britain before the war broke out, and they were obviously prepared to take me on for life, so to speak.
Wow. Did they have other children?
They had 3 other children, 2 sons and a daughter.
So how long did you live there then?
Just until the August 39, because by that time my mother was here. My mother had been obliged to do domestic service,
Yes.
came with nothing, and she was the cook for a family called Chorley, who lived in London but also had a house in the Lake District, and they invited me to come and join my mother during the month of August. And then when the war broke out, the parents went back to London, and they arranged for me to have a free place at one of the schools in Ambleside in the Lake District, and my mother got another job as a cook at this address here, which is Wood Close, Grasmere. And then this was an elderly lady who was absolutely wonderful to her and to me and so on, and then she suddenly died. And then my mother had to get another job, and this was again still in the Lake District, right on Lake Windermere, a beautiful house called Bounds Wood, and she remained there virtually till the end of the war.
So you lived in that house, or you lived in the school?
No, I lived with her, but
right.
This family really treated her as a servant, and we had our own little quarters and a back door to go into the house, and and this house was in a very large garden, goes right down to the lake. And yes, I was allowed to go and swim, but I had to make sure that nobody was using the garden. This kind of strange situation for a small. It was difficult for me to bring school friends home because I felt ashamed of the way I was living, and but it worked, and there we were.
So the infield is the guarantor.
Yes, child lives with mother, who is a domestic, attends Charlotte Mason School, Ambleside. Mr. Infield pays for education and incidentals. Well, they paid very, very reluctantly indeed. And then when it was a question of whether I should go to university, they insisted that I just had to take a secretarial course, and
we might learn more about that in a
yes.
few minutes.
Okay, all right. No, in March 42.
So I think so. As sort of you inferred that he asked to be released from his being a guarantor. Yes. I mean, at the time, I guess things weren't so easy.
There were very strained relations between my mother and the Infield family.
So then we come to March 1942, movement, so that's the children's movement to pay a maximum of £6 and 6 shillings for 4 terms, summer term 1942 to summer term 1943. Yes. So that was
sorry, who was paying this now?
This was now
the
children's movement. So our organisation would have
Mm.
paid, I guess, as the guarantor had decided not to, for the schooling that you had. We sent you birthday greetings in a letter in 1945, which I think you were 18. So then also in November 1945, Hella seen frequently whilst in Cambridge. So I'm not quite sure who saw you frequently, but presumably there was a Cambridge committee from the Central British Fund, because we had committees all over the country. So it's quite nice to see that someone was checking that you were okay.
Well, I have no idea that I have such reason to be grateful to you that somebody was really caring about my progress in life.
Well, I suppose we felt there was some responsibility, but so you were described here as a very pleasant and happy young lady.
Thank goodness for that.
Keen on her studies at LSE, did many part-time jobs during the vacation, living with her mother in London.
Well, what a find, though.
you didn't know that we had any of this stuff, obviously.
No, absolutely not. And, you know, some of it is completely new to me.
Oh, good. I'm glad
And,
we
you
were
know,
able to.
I have no memory of all these meetings with members of the
Central
of the
British
fund,
Fund,
yes.
yes.
And I've walked through long life without realizing just how tough it was financially those years, and how clearly we would not have been able to survive in any sort of decent way without the help that we were given. It's been a complete revelation to me, and I can't say how grateful I am to the World Jewish Relief, both for keeping the records, what they did for me, finding them and letting me see it all. And, you know, it's filled in gaps in my life which I did not expect to fill in. And it's also made me realize that I had some wrong, some memories that were just somewhat distorted. But of course it all started with B and your enterprise, and you've really opened between you. You've opened a completely new world to me now. And I'm really, really very happy about this.